we would put our fingers together every night at the end of the day and say, well, it was a successful day because I still have all my fingers.
Welcome to 10 Minute Travels. With me, as always, is Phil Freeman.
And with me, as always, is Shane Patrick. And we are going to talk a little with skier and traveler and longtime Alaskan, Larry Daniels.
Let's get right to it, shall we?
One of the stories that came out of that was there was Don McLeod. I don't know if you guys remember Don. Don was the originator of the Fizz at Alyeska. So he was the bartender, and he had
what is the Fizz? Nobody knows outside.
Yeah, so the Fizz is a Ramos Fizz. It's a cocktail, and it has raw egg, and it's a gin drink and some soda and a little cream, and it's blended, and it's got a little nutmeg in it. At least the way that Don and now Big Wave Dave carried on that tradition. You're allowed two because they got a lot of alcohol in them, and they smack you up alongside the head and make skiing down really pretty difficult. But Don back then. Don came to Alyeska. This is actually a pretty good story. Don came to Alyeska. He was the Nugget Inn was built in 1969, and the 32-room hotel, big deal, was open. And so Don sold all of the furniture to Alyeska. So Don was from San Francisco. Actually was, I guess, a pretty successful guy. He gets to Alaska, and he met a gal named Mushy, and Mushy was an airline attendant, stew for Ween, Alaska back then, and Don was probably old enough, pretty close to be her father, and but he had an instant crush, and as a result, never left Alaska. I don't think ever lost his crush on Mushy, but Don had this white Fu Manchu mustache. He used to wear a hat that said "Mustache rides 5 cents." But now I completely digress. But so Don, this is the Don we know, and we had this old coring crane, track laying crane. It was a 1946 thing that, they had, I got to be the guy to run it, and I wasn't good at it at all, but I eventually got pretty good at it. But anyhow, it came time to set towers. And so we called this company that owned this thing, York Steel, was supposed to send us an operator. So we call them up and say, hey, it's time to set towers. We need an operator down here. So the next morning, we go down there by the crane, and here's Don McLeod. Don was, as I knew, was either a salesman or a cook or a bartender, and so they sent Don down to be the crane operator, and I had to show him how to start it, had to show him pretty much everything, about it. He's like, well, this guy, but in the end, he actually did operate the thing, and we would put our fingers together every night at the end of the day and say, well, it was a successful day because I still have all my fingers, because, Don was a little he wasn't smooth with the process. Let's put it that way. So I nicknamed him Dangerous Don McLeod, and I called him that for the rest of his life. So Don was a funny guy. Alaska, Girdwood in particular was full of people with a lot of character, and because it was kind of pre-pipeline, or the pipeline was
who owned the resort at that time?
Alaska Airlines did by then. So, okay, I'll give you a little tiny bit of background on there. So the Francois de Gunsberg is the name of the guy that developed Alyeska Resort. He was he was in the oil business down in Denver area, and he had but he came. The Gunsberg family is a French banking family, and they, pretty wealthy family. I'm not sure how much of the money he got out of the deal, but in any event, he was eventually convinced or conned or whatever, come up to Alaska invest, in Alyeska. So he
Did it
started
have
it.
a influence from, the airlines coming through at that point? Was there an international sort of, I want to say backwater up here kind of because
Well, certainly, I mean, if anything gave Alaska any panache at that time, it was the Anchorage International Airport, you know, but I'm not sure that there was an awful lot. I mean, this was shortly after, Alyeska was built shortly after the Swanson River oil field was found. And I suspect that had more to do with the construction or his development or his investment was because there got to be that, the beginnings of an oil boom, in Alaska with the Swanson River field down there, and then the Cook Inlet and the Kenai. So that was growing, and he'd been in the oil business. I think that's probably as much of anything as where he came from. Another guy, he hired a guy named Jim Branch, who was his general manager. Jim, he ultimately, after spending about 6 or 7 years at Alyeska, went back to Franconia Notch, New Hampshire, and formed a company called Snow Engineering, which became kind of the preeminent ski area planning company in the nation. And Jim always said he learned everything. He learned everything not to do at Alyeska.
Well, that's valuable.
Valuable, I mean, yeah. Well, we made that mistake. Don't make it again.
Yep.
and so you're saying there were some sourdough characters back in 74.
Right. Well, and so, yeah, well, first of all, most of the guys were gone from Girdwood Pipe, at least because everybody went to the pipeline, so it was a kind of but there was a little bit of a building boom. If at the time, a guy named Butch King, he was Gary King's son, and actually Gary King Jr. and Gary King's was the sporting goods store, the preeminent, or the pretty much the only sporting goods store in Alaska at the time. So Butch and a couple of his buddies were building, shacks there in Girdwood. So there's still, several of those floating around there, so Butch was, he's a bush pilot and ultimately had a lodge called Wild Man's. He was a wild man, still is a wild man for that matter. That we had Don Conrad, who I was talking about. I mean, Don, he was a cowboy from Utah, and just a really hard charging guy. If you ever wanted to go have fun, he was the guy to go have fun with. However, he was a terrible guy to work for. Wasn't any fun. And then you had Chris. Chris is on Imhoff, which anybody. I mean. First Alyeska Zen Z World, is the name of his book. He has not a shy bone in his body. About 3 or 4 weeks after I went to work there, I was I was looking for Don and looking for for my next task, because he'd had me doing some things, and he and Chris were standing right at the corner of what used to be the swimming pool. So I remember. Yeah. So I go walking up to them to, I'm kind of standing back just a little bit, so I could catch Don's ear when they got done with the conversation, and to see what he wanted me to do. And just as I walked up there, I heard him say, "Stupid crowd." And I went, "Oh, I don't think I want to be around here very long," which, and sure enough, I kind of went around another way and went over to base of Chair 1, which was our cruise shack, our headquarters. And sure enough, about 15 minutes later, here comes Don crashing into and he's picking up all the tools and everything. And well, Don had been fired. And so, so that was kind of the one of the steps to get us to the longest serving crew, guys on the mountain pretty fast, because everybody's either going to work on the slope or getting fired, one or the other.
That was Larry Daniels, longtime Alaskan skier and traveler, talking with us. And if you want to learn anything else about 10-Minute Travels and what we do, go to 10minutetravels.com.
And we want to remind you to make sure that your sense of humor matches your sense of adventure. And please like, subscribe, and share this podcast on all the platforms.